So we have the background image for each div, and the way I like to think about an image in a div is that it's just a div, and you can sort of define a width and height, and behaves like a div. And I think that simplifies a lot of the issues we have with images and the responsive issues. It's quite common that you try and resize an image and it actually doesn't even reduce in size or shrink. So anyway, let's reload, and you can see we have this occurring. So this is the default. You can see the grid. Actually, if I inspect and I'll turn on grid, so in Firefox there's a handy tool where you can turn on the grid and you can sort of see it there. So that's the default way it sort of aligns it, and it's pretty good already. But let's try and improve this. So the way I like to sort of position things in a grid is use this. So we can sort of define the start and end of a column for an image using this. So it's first column till the fourth column, and you can count the columns, right? So this is the first column until the second column, third column, fourth column. So it should end here when we do this. And let's just define a grid row too. So this is the height. So first row, second row, third row. So let's make it go to the third one, and you can see it's that easy to position something in a grid, and that's where a grid sort of really shines relative to other solutions. You can really have sort of a custom sort of height and width of an image. So let's try and make this pretty now. Make it actually a mosaic. So let's make that, and then row can be that, and image 3. And this, I guess, is kind of tedious. Again, you can use some sort of math to calculate this, but I think this is good enough for now. And let's see. So this will be there, and that will be there. So, and then yeah, let's see how it looks. So it looks pretty good. Let's add sort of a gutter between each of the images. So it's pretty easy. You just do a grid gap, and let's make that 10 pixels. So yeah, I'll just turn off grid, and so that's a pretty cool mosaic, and we can make this responsive too pretty easily. But let's try and resize this. So this is sort of the resizing way. As you can see, it actually just keeps the image sort of fixed width and height, and it just sort of crops out some of it. And this may or may not be desirable. There's another way to do this where you use a nested image. I'll chuck it up in the blog post, the code, but you can sort of shrink the image as well. So that's another feature, so that we set the max width so that the images never get too pixelated if the screen gets too large. So let's try and make this responsive now, and it's actually super easy. There's a lot of ways to make this responsive. You could reduce the columns or whatever, but let's just make it simple. So we can do this. So media queries, and max width. So this is when the screen width gets smaller than this, it will trigger whatever is here. So our new styling. So let's make the container be a block, so this removes the grid. So it should be a single thing. And I'm going to show a new sort of selector. Well, this is a sort of interesting selector where you can select anything that starts with whatever is in these quotes, any class. So we can sort of target all of these since they all have image. That's just a handy selector. So let's give it a margin bottom 1 rem, and then height 200 pixels. Oops. Okay. So obviously nothing happens when we refresh, but if we resize this, I meant block there, of course. So the images disappear. That's always great. Missed the equals sign, of course. I guess the syntax could get a little bit tricky, but yeah, that's just what you need to write. You just need to remember that. There we go. So we made it responsive, and so that's pretty cool. And you can add media queries to each image to actually like shift it around or hide images. So you can do cool things with it. One last thing though, you'll notice the images, this one in particular, isn't really centered. Oops. Oh, that's pretty weird. Open the random file. So you can see this isn't really what we want. We want sort of the center of the image, right? So we need to write some more CSS to make that happen. So again, let's use the selector because this sort of group selector, because we want to target all of them. So this is just how, if you're familiar with background images, this is just how you do it. I guess it's just something you have to remember if it doesn't really make sense, but that's just how CSS is. So CSS is really easy to sort of get started, but it's very hard to master. So yeah, there we go. We centered it, and that's what we want, right? One cool thing actually is that the images actually grow larger as the thing expands, because actually the image, the intrinsic width and height, is still some room for the image to grow. So it actually just expands with the viewport. Anyway, that was Mosaics using CSS grids. So you can see it's actually pretty easy to do, and you can start to build off this. And the thing I want to emphasize is sort of the way I did it. And you would see a lot of tutorials they wouldn't really use this approach, but I think this is, in my opinion, the best way. Well, it's got its trade-offs. For example, it's less accessible. You don't have an alt tag. If you had a nested image, right, you could have an alt and for accessibility purposes or whatever. So there's a trade-off, but I like this approach because no matter the image width and height, it will still display correctly in this mosaic form.